Justus Gerstenberg was brought out to the gallows on the 12th of September 1946, and he would face one of the most notorious executioners in history. John C. Woods, the American hangman, was waiting for him on the execution scaffold inside of Landsberg Prison, but Gerstenberg's execution would not go well. Following the end of the Second World War, John C. Woods would execute many of the most high-profile Nazis, but he would perform the Nuremberg executions poorly, as many went wrong. He became known as a butcher, and his credentials were rather sketchy, but he would take the lives of dozens, if not hundreds, of other war criminals at the end of the Second World War. But with the execution of Justus Gerstenberg, his brutal streak would continue. Join us today as we look at this, and to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. On the morning of the 16th of August 1944, a mission to bomb aircraft industries and factories at Halle in Germany took place. The 91st Bombardment Group took off from Bassingbourn in Cambridgeshire, and when the formation was east of Eisenach, they were heading for the target, and they were then attacked by 25 to 30 Focke-Wulf 190s and Bf 109s. The attack surprised the formation, and the group lost 6 aircraft as the Germans made their first pass. One eyewitness of the attack said, "We were flying in number 2 position of lead element, altitude 25,400 feet, time 10 o'clock to 10:10 hours. At this time we were hit from the rear by approximately 25 enemy fighters. I saw 20mm shells hitting and exploding all over the aircraft. Number 4 engine caught fire, and aircraft seemingly went out of control. The ship then went into a shallow dive, rolled over on its back, and exploded in that position with bombs on board. The aircraft disintegrated in mid-air, and no parachutes were seen coming from it." The specific aircraft of 43-38012, a Flying Fortress, was last seen east of Eisenach, but the aircraft wreckage fell to earth. On board this aircraft, Sergeant Holden stated that his left gun was inoperable, and he was last heard when he called the fighters that were at high 6 o'clock. The last anyone heard from him was when he identified the fighters as German and opened fire, but the crew believed that he had been killed or seriously wounded during the fighter attack. But the order on board this specific aircraft was then given to bail out. They were in a Flying Fortress, and with this the crew jumped out. The crew presumed that Sergeant Holden had not got out of the aircraft, and he had been in it when it exploded, but this was not the case. Later the true fate of him would emerge, and it involved a German former Master Sergeant in the rural police, and an ardent member of the SA and the Nazi Party. Justus Gerstenberg was in the vicinity of those who jumped from the Flying Fortress and where they would land. It was later heard in a courtroom how on the 16th or 17th of July 1944, a number of air battles over the villages of Gut Freudenthal and Gertenbach had resulted in many aircraft being shot down, and one American airman had landed by parachute over these specific villages. The first on the scene was a local farmer, and as they looked for an American airman, Justus Gerstenberg flew past the locals on his motorbike. The farmer testified that the airman was found on his back lying smoking a cigarette, and that he had an injury to his left hand, but he was still conscious and seemed to be okay. Gerstenberg, the former policeman, then arrived, and he demanded to know why the American airman was still alive, and why he had not been slaughtered and executed. He allegedly said, "Why haven't you beaten him to death yet? Have you not yet killed the flyer?" Gerstenberg took action and charge, and he then was seen searching the airman for weapons, and then he would carry out an execution. This airman was the elusive Sergeant Holden, who had gone missing. Gerstenberg, after searching the American, pulled out his own pistol, and then he shot Holden between the eyes, killing him instantly. He then ordered a German civilian named Wilhelm Siebert to bury the remains of Holden, and when asked what happened to him, Gerstenberg told the others that he had died due to the wound in his left hand, and also his legs when he landed. The following day, Siebert recovered the body, and he found that the left leg of Holden was in fact broken, and he then placed the body of the American in a coffin, and transported it to a nearby village to be buried. But when Gerstenberg the next day went back and opened the coffin, he removed the dog tags, and the body was buried in the cemetery, and a wooden cross was placed over the grave, and the dog tag was used to mark the grave of Willard M. Holden. So what had happened was that Gerstenberg had executed the American airmen in cold blood. At the end of the Second World War, Gerstenberg was located, and as mentioned, he was brought to trial. His defence claimed that the body exhumed from Holden's grave had injuries not consistent with the execution carried out by Gerstenberg, but there were many eyewitnesses who had seen him execute the American airmen in cold blood. Because of this, the courtroom then decided that there was sufficient evidence to find Gerstenberg guilty of the execution of Willard M. Holden, and because of this, the death sentence was then passed. This was approved on the 6th of June 1945, but it would be over a year before his execution was carried out. Justus Gerstenberg was taken to Landsberg Prison, the very same prison that Hitler would be held in before he came to power, and he was awaiting his execution for over a year. But the man who would act as his executioner would be the infamous John C. Woods, a botching executioner who would, during the Nuremberg executions, become notorious as they went very wrong. In fact, many of his executions went wrong. At Nuremberg, there were even accusations of Woods disappearing behind the trapdoor's curtain and pulling down on bodies, as the necks of the high-ranking Nazis were not snapped, and then he finished them off. But on the 12th of September 1946, John C. Woods and his assistant, Joseph Malta, travelled to Landsberg to execute Justus Gerstenberg. However, the execution would yet again not go well. Woods led 37 Germans to the gallows during this period of time, and Gerstenberg's went appallingly wrong. Justus, a 49-year-old German, was led out of his cell and up to the steps of the gallows, and he was accompanied by a priest and many other military policemen. His arms and legs were secured and tied together to ensure that he did not wriggle or escape, and then at the top of the gallows, John C. Woods approached him. He would try to use the long drop method to carry this out, and he had already tied the noose. He slipped a cap over Gerstenberg's head and then placed the noose over it before Woods moved him over the trapdoor and then released the lever. But this went terribly wrong, as just as Gerstenberg plunged through the trapdoor, he was hit in the face by presumably the trapdoor which did not lock, and in this he broke his jaw and several of his teeth were knocked out on the way down. This was not the only execution of condemned people that John C. Woods would botch, as he would then be sent to Nuremberg to carry out the executions of the Nuremberg defendants. Justus Gerstenberg would then be cut down and he was placed inside of a coffin. But he was one of John C. Woods' victims who would be executed in a slapdash way that did go wrong. Woods would later be proud of his exploits, but he was a man who had lied to become an executioner in the first place, so he could legally kill. He was not bothered by criticism of his executions that went wrong, and Justus Gerstenberg's was one example of this. But following this, Woods was then given the most high-profile job of his career and of the post-war setting, and it was unfathomable how the Americans thought he was the best man to perform the Nuremberg executions. But the man he hanged that day inside of Landsberg Prison was a Nazi who was ruthless and who would not hesitate but to slaughter and execute an American airman who should have been treated better. There were a number of captured airmen who this did happen to, as they were parachuted into Germany, and there would be a lot of anger towards them due to the heavy bombing of German towns and cities. But Sergeant Holden should have been taken as a prisoner of war, then processed through the correct channels, and he could very easily have ended up inside a prisoner of war camp such as Stalag Luft 3. But he would be executed by a ruthless Nazi who would then pay the ultimate price for his actions. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.